Grace watched the seconds ticking by on the clock on the wall. 3 minutes left. She hated Irish. Well, she didn't hate it, but she didn't like it. It was one subject she wasn't particularly good at, and that bothered her. She was mostly an A student, but in Irish she was a B. Stupid Irish. Jenny slapped her hand over her own mouth. Some heads turned their way. What is it? Grace whispered. Don't look back. Grace instinctively turned her head. I said, don't look back, Jenny hissed. Okay, look back, but don't let anyone see you. Confused, Grace pretended to scratch her neck, glancing towards the back of the classroom just long enough to catch a glimpse of platinum blonde curls and ruby lips. Oh my God! Sitting in the back row with a pen held between her teeth and one hand absent-mindedly twisting a strand of hair was Marilyn Monroe. Why did she do that? Grace gasped. Don't know, said Jenny, but she's getting awesome at glamour. Yeah, but why now? People are going to notice. She mustn't realise. We'll have to signal her somehow. How? Jenny asked, without making anyone else look back. Grace pulled a hair bobbin from her pocket and twisted the eraser off the end of her pencil. You'll have to create a distraction, she said, while I get her attention. What kind of distraction? Anything. Just make sure you get people looking forward, not back. Hurry. Grace tucked the eraser into one end of the bobbin and readied it to fire. There was a sudden whoosh of air beside her and a loud bang as Jenny leapt up onto the desk, pointing at a spot in front of her and shrieking, Rat! There's a rat! She stared and pointed frantically as if following the creature to the front of the class. Other students began to squeal and a few climbed on tables. Jenny! Mrs. Henley shouted. Get down from there immediately! There's a rat, miss! Jenny's voice was still a high-pitched screech. Right there! It's right near you, miss! Mrs. Henley opened her mouth to speak again, but glanced nervously at the floor, eventually kneeling on her own chair, lifting both feet off the ground. Grace swiftly turned, pulled the bobbin taut and let the eraser fly. It smacked into Rachel's cheek, and luckily the hysterical noise in the classroom covered her loud Ow! She glared at Grace in confusion. Grace immediately pointed to her own face, pinched her cheeks, pouted her lips, and tugged at handfuls of her hair. Rachel stared at her for a moment before starting to touch her own face and hair. She jumped in realization and shook her head roughly to try and shake off the glamour spell. Grace could see just a few strands of straight dark hair spilling out through the yellow curls, and the ruby lips shrink a little, but that was it. The spell seemed stuck. Marilyn Monroe just wouldn't leave. More! Grace hissed at Jenny. What? More! Grace repeated. Give it loads! I've got to get Rach out of the classroom. Jenny shrieked even louder at their teacher. Ah! Can't you see it, miss? She yelled. By now Mrs. Henley was on all fours on top of her desk. It's foaming at the mouth! I think it's got plague! Don't let it bite me, miss! That was the last straw for the class. A few students bolted for the door, followed by everyone else. In the confusion, Grace grabbed hold of Rachel, pulled her jumper over her head, started running and didn't stop until they reached the girls' toilets. Shake it off, Rach, she said. I'm trying, said Rachel, her face red from the exertion. Slowly but surely, the Marilyn curls disappeared beneath sprouting strands of Rachel's dark hair. Her lips lost their ruby tint, and the dark beauty spot beside her mouth faded into her porcelain skin. What was that? Said Grace. What did you do that in class for? We could have been caught. I didn't know it had worked, Rachel replied, still catching her breath. I just did it quick. I wasn't even trying. The door burst open and Jenny marched in. That was amazing, she said, grinning. Rachel smiled bashfully and shook her head. Sorry, she said. I was just trying it out and... Don't apologise, Jenny interrupted. That was incredible. You're getting so good at it. You were totally Marilyn Monroe. Amazing. Not amazing, said Grace sternly. Dangerous. There's no way we could have explained that if anyone saw. Lucky you were stuck in the corner of the class. I don't know how Mrs. Henley didn't spot you. I know, I'm sorry, Rachel replied. We have to be careful if we're going to go on trying out spells. I'm starting to think Mrs. Quinlan and Miss Lemon were right. Well, here we go, said Jenny, rolling her eyes. What? Siding with them again. They're not right, Grace. They're just nervous about letting us have any control. They're afraid of what we can do. And they're right to be, Grace's voice rose. Have you forgotten how much trouble we caused last time by summoning a demon? No, I haven't forgotten, Jenny pursed her lips. But it hasn't terrified me out of doing magic altogether. We'll make mistakes, Grace, but we have to make them so we can learn. This isn't learning, this is messing around, and it's really dangerous. Please stop fighting, Rachel said suddenly. She looked from Grace to Jenny as they stared at each other. Look, you're both right, she said. Yeah, it worked out as quite a cool spell, but there's no way I should have even attempted it in class. It was silly. I could have got us all in a lot of trouble. Grace lowered her eyes and said softly, I didn't mean to give out to you, Rach. It's just, I know. You're looking out for us and that's great. And Jenny just wants us to get better at magic, and that's great too. But I won't try any spells in class again, I promise. Well, just don't try them out at Mrs. Quinlan's tonight anyway, said Grace with a grin. The other two smiled at the thought. No problem, said Rachel.